A disgraced billionaire ruined, and desperate finds a mysterious homeless girl with a mind that could change everything. Their secret bond threatens powerful forces. Can he protect her before it's too late? Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? If this story resonates with you, like and subscribe to follow the fight for hope and survival. The rain, relentless and unforgiving, hammered against the slick pavements of the Hearthstone district, turning the bustling streets of Port City into blurred, reflective canvases of gray. Elias Thorne stood outside the monolithic courthouse, his once impeccably tailored suit, now a heavy sodden shroud clinging to his defeated frame. The lapels, symbols of a bygone era of power and influence, felt like cruel reminders of his stripped-bare existence. Moments ago, his lawyer, a man whose fees could have bought him a small island a year prior, had delivered the final crushing blow. The appeal was denied. There was no turning back. Everything was gone. His visionary company, Omnicorp, once hailed as the vanguard of neural innovation. His groundbreaking patents, years of sleepless nights poured into lines of code. His investors, who had once lined up like devotees, now abandoned him. Even the elegant minimalist apartment that had served as his sanctuary was seized. The financial press, with their insatiable appetite for drama, had dubbed it the crash of the century. A headline seared into his memory proclaimed, "The spectacular fall of a man once hailed as the tech world's golden boy." Elias didn't argue. He didn't have the energy or, frankly, the will. He just stood there watching his lawyer, a distant figure, now walk away with a briefcase that had once been his, carrying the remnants of a life that no longer existed. A few people passed by, their gazes fleeting. Some perhaps recognized the face that had once graced the covers of tech magazines, the visage of the disruptor, the young titan, the next visionary. Most didn't. In the cacophony of the rain and the muted roar of tires on wet asphalt, Elias felt a profound cold settle deep within him. It wasn't the chill of the November rain. It was something far more insidious. It was the icy grip of shame, a chilling companion he had come to know intimately over the past weeks. He turned down a narrow alley, a forgotten vein in the city's sprawling network, leading toward the Haven, the homeless shelter where he had been staying for the past week. His steps were slow, each footfall a heavy testament to the burden he carried. The shelter wasn't terrible, not in the way one might imagine. It offered clean beds, warm food, and a tacit agreement among its inhabitants to mostly keep to themselves. But for Elias, it was another kind of court, a perpetual tribunal where his failures were perpetually on trial every single night. As he rounded the corner, something shifted in the gray monotony. A flicker of movement, a splash of unexpected color against the urban decay. A little girl, perhaps no older than 8 or 9, was crouched under a dilapidated awning, partially shielding her from the downpour. She was drawing on the wet sidewalk with a piece of chalk. At first, Elias thought little of it, dismissing her as just another anonymous child, a silent casualty of the streets, merely killing time. But then his programmer's eye, dormant for so long, began to discern a pattern. She wasn't simply doodling. She was writing something deliberate, complex. Symbols, numbers, long chains of figures laid out in neat, almost elegant strokes. It made no logical sense. She was barefoot, her hoodie swallowed her tiny frame 3 sizes too big, yet her face was utterly calm, completely focused. Elias stopped walking. He watched her from a distance, a strange knot forming in his stomach. What was he seeing? The girl didn't look up. Her small hand moved quickly, almost rhythmically, with a practiced grace that suggested she had done this countless times before. Around her, the indifferent flow of city life continued. People walked past without a second glance. One woman, perhaps out of fleeting compassion, tossed a coin near the girl's bare feet. The girl didn't even flinch, her concentration unbroken. Curiosity, a long-forgotten sensation, stirred within Elias. He stepped closer, the rain still falling, but less intensely now. He could begin to make out parts of what she had written, derivatives, logarithms, complex algebraic expressions. He recognized some of them from his rigorous college days at Westerly University, from the calculus and advanced mathematics courses he had once devoured. But why, he thought, would a child be scribbling calculus in chalk in the rain? He blinked, questioning his own perception. Perhaps it was just nonsense, random symbols copied from some obscure textbook. But no, there was structure. There was undeniable logic. and she was erasing parts, then rewriting them clearly in the process of solving something intricate. His programmer's mind, accustomed to recognizing patterns and debugging systems, understood this intuitively. His hesitation evaporated, replaced by a surge of unbidden interest. He crouched down a few feet from her, careful not to startle her, and said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "Hey, what are you doing?" She paused just for a second, her head tilted slightly and her eyes a strange, almost luminous shade of green under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight met his. Nothing she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Then, as if their brief interaction was an unwelcome interruption, she went back to her calculations. Elias didn't push. He just watched, mesmerized. A distant car horn blared. The rain lightened for a moment, then returned with renewed intensity. Still, she worked absorbed in her world of numbers. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer this time. Again she paused. "Iris," she said. Just that. No last name, no reciprocal question. He didn't expect one. She looked like someone who had ceased to expect anything meaningful a long, long time ago. A security guard from a nearby bank emerged, his voice a gruff bark. "Move along, you can't be here." Iris didn't even flinch. With unhurried grace, she gathered her chalk into a small, worn plastic bag and stood up. Elias stood too, his eyes fixed on the girl. "She's with me." He heard himself say the words escaping his lips without conscious thought, without understanding why. The guard gave him a suspicious, scrutinizing look, perhaps recognizing the once famous face, perhaps simply dismissing him as another drifter. He didn't argue. Iris walked past Elias barefoot and silent. He turned a silent sentinel and followed her. "Where do you live?" he asked, the question hanging in the damp air. She simply shrugged, a gesture of profound emptiness. "Nowhere," she replied. He nodded as if he understood. He didn't. Not truly. But he wasn't about to pretend he had answers, not when his own life was a shattered puzzle. They walked in silence until they reached a nondescript corner. She stopped. "You can stop following me now," she said, her voice still quiet, devoid of accusation. Elias managed a faint smile, a bitter twist of his lips. "I wasn't. I was just walking," he replied, a half-truth that felt like a comfort. That night, sleep was an elusive phantom for Elias. The shelter, usually a cacophony of rustling blankets and the persistent hum of an ancient heater, seemed unnervingly quiet. But his mind was loud, a storm of numbers and equations. He kept seeing the intricate figures etched onto the wet pavement. The way Iris's tiny hand moved, almost as if she were listening to some internal symphony of numbers that no one else could hear. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it didn't matter. He had his own insurmountable problems. No home, no money, no discernible plan for survival. But Iris had pierced something deep within him. Not pity, not even mere curiosity. Something far more profound. Something akin to recognition. It was as if he had glimpsed a reflection of himself in her, not as he was now, broken, disgraced, but as he used to be, brilliant, misunderstood, unafraid. That stark recognition scared him more than anything he had faced during his public downfall. By morning, compelled by an invisible force, Elias was waiting on the same corner, 2 steaming cups of coffee clutched in his hands. Iris didn't appear. He waited again the next day, a solitary figure in the urban landscape, and the next. On the 3rd morning, a small spectral figure emerged from behind a battered dumpster, slowly eating crackers from a crumpled wrapper. "You're still here," Iris said, her voice devoid of surprise, as if his persistence was merely another predictable variable in her complex world. "I brought you something," he replied, holding out the coffee. She took it, brought it to her nose, inhaled deeply, then sipped carefully. "It's not poisoned," he joked, a desperate attempt at lightness. She looked up at him, her green eyes unwavering, a deadpan expression on her face. "I know you're not good at lying." Elias laughed for the first time in weeks, a raw, rusty sound that felt both alien and liberating. "I guess I'm not." They talked slowly, awkwardly, in halting exchanges. Iris didn't volunteer information readily, her past a closely guarded fortress, but she didn't walk away either. She revealed in brief, clipped sentences that she used to live with her aunt, but things had gotten bad. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Elias knew that tone intimately. He had heard it in his own voice that practiced vagueness whenever reporters had probed too deeply into the painful, unresolved history of his own estranged family. Over the next few days, their quiet routine solidified into a comforting rhythm: morning coffee, the scratch of chalk on wet pavement, Elias's tentative questions, and Iris's eloquent silences. Sometimes she would draw for hours, lost in her intricate equations. Sometimes she would simply sit, observing the world with an unnerving intensity. But she always showed up, and Elias, now inextricably drawn into her orbit, kept watching, listening, wondering at the silent brilliance unfolding before him. Then came the day he made the first call. He found a payphone, inserted his last few coins, and dialed social services. He told them, his voice surprisingly firm, that he wanted to adopt a girl. The immediate questions were predictable, yet devastating. "Do you have a job?" they asked. "No," he replied, the word heavy with humiliation. "Do you have a permanent address?" Also no. "Are you mentally stable?" He hesitated a beat too long. The woman on the other end of the line emitted a short, dismissive laugh. "Sir, this isn't a joke," she said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled contempt. "You need to be realistic." Elias hung up without answering. Realistic. That word, he thought bitterly, had destroyed more dreams than any failure ever could. But Elias wasn't thinking about realism anymore. He was thinking about Iris, about the stark, bleak reality of what would happen to her if absolutely no one stepped in. And for the first time in a long, long time, he found he didn't care what anyone else thought. What had begun as a fleeting, perhaps even viral glimpse of a broken man observing a child sketching math in the rain would eventually evolve into something none of them could have possibly predicted. Not the voracious media, not the utterly lost Elias, not even the enigmatic Iris. Because behind that chalk-covered sidewalk, under that torn, oversized hoodie residing within a girl the world had already written off as invisible, was a mind of staggering proportions. A mind that possessed the raw, untamed potential to change everything. But before it could even begin to change the world, Elias instinctively knew it would fundamentally change him. He sat on the edge of his cot at the Haven, the harsh fluorescent lights casting long, accusing shadows. He stared at the application form on his phone screen, Foster Adoption Application, Port City State. His finger hovered above the start button, trembling slightly as if it were a trigger poised to unleash an irreversible cascade of events. He knew, with an agonizing clarity, the absurdity of his situation. He had no money, no address that wasn't shared with 3 other silent, desperate men, no legal stability, no social standing. Yet something profound had shifted within him over that past week. Iris had appeared every morning for 6 consecutive days, and with each precise line of chalk, each complex problem she solved with unnerving ease. Each silent cup of coffee they shared, she etched herself deeper and deeper into the last functioning, undamaged part of his heart. Elias wasn't sure if he believed in fate anymore, not after the capricious whims that had orchestrated his downfall. But if he did, he thought it would look exactly like this. A girl with bare feet and a mind that defied all explanation manifesting in his life precisely as the world had finished its brutal work of kicking him down. He took a deep, fortifying breath and began filling out the form. It asked about income. He lied his fingers typing with a practiced ease he hadn't realized he still possessed. He claimed freelance tech consulting work vague and untraceable. It asked about a permanent address. He listed the Haven, knowing with a dull certainty that it wouldn't fly, as the bureaucrats would say. Then came the section for references. He paused, his mind a sudden terrifying blank. There was no one left who would vouch for him. His sister Evelyn hadn't answered a single one of his desperate calls in months. His former assistant, a young woman he had mentored from intern to senior project manager, had blocked his number. Elias leaned back against the rough wall, exhaling slowly through his nose, and looked up at the stained ceiling. He thought of Iris, curled under that broken awning, scribbling as if her brilliant brain were a race car running out of time. He couldn't walk away from her. Not now. Not after seeing what he had seen. Not after that morning when she had turned to him, her luminous green eyes wide and vulnerable, and asked with a simple, devastating purity, "Did they laugh at you too?" The social worker he met 3 days later at the county office seemed to perceive him as nothing more than a bad joke. Her name was Brenda, a woman with a tightly pulled ponytail, a perpetually clutched clipboard, and a voice that remained eerily flat, even when she articulated statements that should have carried the crushing weight of judgment. Mr. Thorne. She began flipping through the sparse papers of his application, her expression unchanging. Let me get this straight. You're applying to adopt a minor. You're unemployed, living in temporary housing, and currently under review for financial misconduct. Elias didn't flinch. He had anticipated this. The misconduct charges were dropped. He stated his voice calm, though a tremor ran through him. It was all civil, not criminal. Brenda offered no smile. Still not exactly the picture of stability, Mr. Thorne. Elias leaned forward, his voice earnest, fueled by a desperation he rarely revealed. I'm not asking for charity, he pleaded. I'm asking for a chance, for her. Brenda closed the folder with a definitive snap. Let's be honest, Mr. Thorne, this looks like a publicity stunt. That was the precise moment the full agonizing weight of his downfall truly registered, not just in the unforgiving eyes of the law, but in the pervasive, unyielding grip of public perception. Once Elias Thorne's face had graced the covers of prestigious magazines, heralded as the disruptor, the young titan, the next big thing. Now, when people looked at him, they saw only failure walking in old, worn-out shoes. He left the office, a storm of fury raging within him. Not at Brenda. She was merely a cog in the impersonal machine. His anger was directed fiercely and painfully at himself for harboring the foolish expectation of anything different. Outside, Iris was waiting for him, perched on a cold concrete bench. She didn't ask how it went. She simply looked up, her gaze perceptive beyond her years. They think you're crazy, right? He managed a bitter smile. Yeah, maybe I am. She kicked her bare heels idly against the concrete. Then you're the only one who makes sense. They began to spend more time together, a quiet, unconventional companionship. It wasn't because Elias had any legal authority over her. It was simply because she allowed it. They would sit in a small, neglected park, the rustling leaves providing a gentle backdrop as she showed him strange, intricate drawings, blueprints for machines, cryptic lines of code baffling numerical sequences. She never explained them, and he, respecting her silent world, never asked. One day, she quietly asked if she could sleep at the Haven. He said he would try. He approached the night staff, pleading her case. They refused immediately. No minors allowed, one stated brusquely. Adults only. When Elias protested, one of the older staffers, a man whose eyes held a weary wisdom, pulled him aside and warned him in a low voice. Careful, man. You get too attached to someone like her. It'll hurt more when they disappear. But Iris didn't disappear. Every morning, like a quiet, unwavering promise, she showed up. And every single night, Elias felt the crushing weight of the world's judgment, an unspoken chorus telling him he had no right to want to save someone when he couldn't even save his own shattered life. On the seventh day, a renewed surge of desperate hope compelled him to make another call, this time to his sister, Evelyn. She answered only because the call came from a new, untraceable burner number. What now, Elias? She snapped, her voice devoid of any warmth, any greeting. No hello, no warmth, he thought bitterly. I need a reference, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. For what she demanded, he told her. Silence stretched on the line, thick with disbelief. Then a sharp, disbelieving laugh. You want to adopt a child, Elias? Are you out of your mind? You can't even pay your own rent. His jaw tightened. Her name is Iris, he said, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. She's brilliant. She has no one. Evelyn snorted a harsh, dismissive sound. God, Elias, you don't get it. You're not a hero in some movie. You're a screw-up trying to drag a kid down with you. He hung up the receiver heavy in his hand, the phone call a fresh wound on his already scarred soul. That night, he sat with Iris on the back steps of an abandoned storefront, the damp concrete cold beneath them. She was intently trying to construct a triangle puzzle using broken sticks she had found. She didn't talk much, lost in the quiet logic of her task. Then, out of nowhere, her voice a soft whisper in the stillness, she said, You don't have to save me, you know. Elias looked at her, his heart clenching. I'm not trying to save you, he replied honestly. I just want you to have a chance, a real chance. She didn't respond right away. Then, even more quietly, almost swallowed by the night, she whispered, Nobody ever wanted me before. He longed to tell her he did, that he wanted her more than anything. But he knew with a painful clarity that those words would only mean something if he could somehow prove it. Driven by this desperate need for proof, Elias began a tireless, disheartening campaign. He started visiting local schools one by one, walking miles across the sprawling city. He would approach the front desk, his voice a mixture of hope and weary determination, asking about special testing for gifted students. Most of them turned him away at the reception desk, their expressions ranging from polite pity to overt suspicion. "We can't administer IQ tests without parental consent," one administrative assistant told him, her tone final. "She's not in the system," said another, as if being outside their bureaucratic boxes rendered a human being non-existent. Elias kept trying. He brought videos on his old cracked smartphone, raw, unedited footage of Iris solving incredibly complex logic puzzles, scribbling equations that most adults, even highly educated ones, wouldn't begin to understand. One teacher, her face etched with skepticism, accused him outright of faking it. "You think we haven't seen stunts like this before?" she scoffed. It was like banging his head against a concrete wall over and over. The more he pushed, the more people rolled their eyes, dismissed him, or simply became indifferent. And all the while, Iris kept showing up every morning like clockwork, unchanged, unshaken, as if she quietly expected to be ignored by the world. One afternoon, after yet another soul-crushing school rejection, he took her to a used bookstore, a small dusty sanctuary just to kill time to escape the rain and the weight of another failure. Inside, Iris, with her usual quiet independence, wandered off. A few minutes later, Elias found her in the science section, a place where he himself once found solace, deeply engrossed, flipping through a dense physics textbook whose title he couldn't even pronounce. The owner, an old man with a perpetually sarcastic smile and a gnarled cane, shuffled over. "She yours?" he asked, his eyes sharp, assessing. Elias paused, trying to formulate a truthful yet protective answer. The man nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Smart one," he mused. "Asked me if I had Feynman's notes in the original edition." Elias blinked, surprised. "Did you?" he asked. The old man chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "No," he admitted, "but she's the only kid in years who's asked." It was the first time Elias had seen someone not laugh, not question, not even look at her with suspicion. Just accept without fanfare or judgment. That night, Elias walked Iris back to the steps of an old church, a place where she sometimes found refuge for the night. He gave her his only blanket, thin and worn, even though he needed its meager warmth too. "You're not giving up?" she asked, her voice small against the vastness of the city night. "No," he said, his voice firm, unwavering, "because if I do, they win." She didn't ask who they were. She knew. They were the people who had turned their backs on her, the ones who had turned their backs on him. The system, the indifferent, often cruel world. They were different fundamentally in their life paths, but broken in the same profound way. And Elias was beginning to understand with a clarity that both humbled and terrified him that perhaps the girl he had so desperately believed he needed to rescue was in a quiet, undeniable way the one rescuing him. Before Elias Thorne found himself sleeping on a cot in a shelter chasing unresponsive social workers down the echoing corridors of City Hall, he was a name that carried immense weight in the glittering, competitive world of Silicon Valley. At the tender age of 27, he had graced the cover of Neural Innovator magazine, lauded as a visionary for his revolutionary breakthroughs in machine learning and real-time predictive algorithms. Investors eager to hitch their wagons to the next big thing lined up like fanboys, their portfolios open and waiting. Journalists with their ever-present notebooks and hungry microphones hung on his every cryptic tweet, dissecting his words for hidden meaning. His company Omnicorp had blossomed from a humble college dorm room operation into a billion-dollar valuation before his 30th birthday. People whispered that he was the next Jobs, but with an added captivating charisma, less cold, more human. He famously wore sneakers to high-stakes board meetings, a defiant symbol of his anti-establishment ethos, and gave TED Talks that, despite their dense technical content, somehow moved audiences to tears. He spoke passionately about ethics, about corporate responsibility, about harnessing technology to truly help people, not to exploit them. Back then, he genuinely believed it. Or perhaps he simply needed to believe that something good, something transformative could emerge from the inherent chaos within his own brilliant, restless mind. His childhood, unlike his glittering ascent, had been anything but glamorous. He was raised in a sprawling, desolate trailer park on the dusty outskirts of Spokane by a single father who Elias often reflected seemed to drink more than he worked. From an early age, Elias learned to retreat to construct his own meticulously ordered world inside the glowing screen of a computer. Code was safe. Code obeyed rules. Humans, he learned painfully, did not. After his father died in a tragic DUI crash when Elias was just 15, he spiraled into a dark, confusing period, almost getting expelled from school. But then a pivotal figure emerged, Miss Albright, a compassionate, insightful math teacher who, seeing something deeper than just a troubled teenager, gave him an old discarded laptop and a simple, profound challenge: build something. He did. A basic scheduling application, raw and unrefined, yet possessing an undeniable elegance. Somehow it caught the attention of a local developer. From there, the snowball began to roll, gathering momentum, internships, scholarships, and eventually the hallowed halls of Westerly University. That first year in college felt like a revelation, the first time he ever had his own room, his own bed, his own sacred quiet. It felt like a dream. Until it wasn't. Omnicorp was born out of sheer desperation. He had dropped out after a mental breakdown during his sophomore year, overwhelmed by the pressures of academia and the lingering echoes of his past, but he fiercely refused to go back home to that world of broken promises and faded hopes. So instead, he built software raw and unpolished that could predict stock market fluctuations using nascent neural learning models. It was crude experimental, but remarkably it worked. He demoed it in a friend's cramped garage for a handful of angel investors who were more curious than entirely convinced. One of them was Victor Sterling, an older, impeccably sharp man, the kind of individual who spoke little but missed absolutely nothing. Victor handed him his very first seed check, the genesis of Omnicorp, and his words, spoken with a quiet intensity, would forever echo in Elias's mind. "You're going to need someone to protect you from yourself." Elias hadn't understood what he meant at the time. Later, much later, he would comprehend with agonizing clarity just how profoundly prophetic those words truly were. The early years of Omnicorp were pure magic, a whirlwind of exhilarating creation. Elias worked 18 hours a day, fueled by cheap ramen and endless energy drinks, barely sleeping. But it never felt like work. It felt like building a spaceship from scratch, piece by painstaking piece. The predictive application went live, and user numbers skyrocketed. Hedge funds, sensing the immense potential, began offering lucrative licensing deals. In just 2 dizzying years, Omnicorp transformed from a 5-person operation squeezed into a rented apartment into a sprawling enterprise of 200 employees housed in a gleaming San Francisco high-rise. Elias wasn't just rich, he was profoundly influential. Think tanks invited him to speak, seeking his insights on the future of AI. Lawmakers, bewildered by the rapid pace of technological change, actually asked for his opinion on data regulation. But as Omnicorp grew, expanding its reach into every conceivable corner of modern life, so too did an insidious, suffocating pressure. The algorithms, once a source of pride, were becoming too powerful too fast. They began predicting consumer behavior down to the hour, predicting risk crime, even the subtle onset of disease. Elias began to question with a growing unease what they were truly doing, the ethical implications of their creation. That's when the inevitable escalating fights with Victor began. Victor, ever the pragmatist, wanted to monetize every single layer, to sell predictive models to advertisers, to governments, to insurance companies, anyone who could profit from knowing the unknowable. Elias pushed back fiercely. "We're not building a crystal ball for corporations to exploit people," he argued, his voice laced with indignation. Victor, unflinching, countered with cold, hard numbers, the relentless pressure of the board, the boundless market opportunities. Elias held his ground for a while, a solitary figure against the relentless tide of corporate ambition. Then came the inevitable catastrophic blow, the whistleblower. A junior developer, his conscience finally snapping under the weight of Omnicorp's unethical practices, courageously leaked internal emails. These damning communications revealed that Omnicorp had quietly, secretly sold a highly sensitive risk assessment tool to a private prison conglomerate. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Omnicorp's stock plummeted, a freefall that erased billions. Ethics watchdogs, sensing blood in the water, launched aggressive inquiries. Elias, desperate, claimed he had no knowledge of the deal. Victor, with a chilling smile, said otherwise, throwing him to the wolves. The board, needing a swift public scapegoat, didn't hesitate. Elias's shares were ruthlessly diluted. His access to Omnicorp's systems was unceremoniously revoked. In less than a month, he plummeted from visionary CEO to a catastrophic liability. The public fallout was vicious, a feeding frenzy of condemnation. News outlets once fawning now called his story a cautionary tale of genius turned reckless. Former allies, sensing the toxic fallout, swiftly distanced themselves. Former friends, once a constant presence, vanished into thin air. He tried to fight back, launching desperate press releases, granting revealing interviews, even appearing on a niche tech podcast. But the damage was already done. It was irreparable. And when the lawsuits began civil, not criminal, but devastatingly costly, he had no team left to shield him, no one to fight in his corner. His assets were frozen. His elegant home, a symbol of his hard-won success, was seized. His credibility, once his most valuable currency, was shredded beyond recognition. He remembered the day he stood in front of the judge who denied his final appeal, a chilling echo of his current predicament. He didn't cry. He didn't even speak. There was nothing left to say. That's when he arrived at the Haven, carrying a single duffel bag containing a few worn clothes, some salvaged hard drives, and the shattered remains of a once magnificent dream. No one there cared who he had been. They simply pointed him to an empty bed and informed him flatly that the lights went off at 10 o'clock. The silence at night in the shelter was different there. Heavy, oppressive, almost accusing. He spent those early days going through the motions, a phantom limb of his former self. He scoured job boards, applied for positions he was ridiculously overqualified for, attended useless, humiliating interviews only to be turned down repeatedly. No one, it seemed, wanted the liability of a disgraced founder. No one wanted someone with those damning headlines irrevocably attached to his name. He stopped trying after a while, the effort simply too much to bear. He began walking the city aimlessly, endlessly, a ghost wandering through a world that no longer recognized him. He was hoping for anything to break the crushing monotony of his despair. And that precisely was when he found Iris. She reminded him of himself not in her physical appearance, but in her profound detachment, in the way she refused to make eye contact, refused to acknowledge anyone directly. That impenetrable wall of silence, that armor of apathy. She didn't try to be seen, didn't crave attention yet. She couldn't help but stand out in her sheer unyielding brilliance. The way she thought, the disarmingly insightful questions she asked often without uttering a sound. She never once divulged her full tragic story, but Elias knew pain when he saw it. And something in her, the way she consciously avoided direct eye contact, yet absorbed and studied everything else around her with an almost terrifying intensity, told him that whatever unspeakable trauma had brought her to these unforgiving streets hadn't miraculously broken her yet. She was surviving, just as he was. But survival for both of them wasn't enough. Not anymore. He watched her captivated as she worked through intricate logic puzzles in her worn notebook, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. He thought about the very first time he saw code lines of abstract commands suddenly come alive on a screen, transforming into a tangible, functioning program. He remembered the visceral thrill, the satisfying click of understanding the sudden imposition of perfect order in what had once been chaos. Iris, he realized, possessed that same fire, buried deep within her, burning quietly, but with an undeniable, unstoppable intensity. She didn't talk about dreams. She didn't talk much at all. But when she looked at a complex problem, her entire body would still her focus. So absolute, it was as if the world around her faded into a silent, irrelevant blur. It was just her and the elusive solution waiting to be found. Elias hadn't seen that kind of profound, all-consuming focus in years, not even in himself, not since Omnicorp had become a corporate behemoth. One quiet night as they sat on a park bench, the city's distant hum, a backdrop to their shared silence, Elias finally asked her, his voice hesitant, "What do you want, Iris?" She looked up from her notebook, her delicate brow furrowing in a rare frown. "Want," she echoed, as if the concept itself was foreign to her. He nodded. "Yeah, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be?" She blinked slowly, those luminous green eyes, contemplating his question with an unnerving depth. "Peace and quiet," she said, her voice soft but firm. Then after a moment she added, almost as an afterthought, "and maybe a microscope." Elias laughed, not because it was funny, but because it made him feel something other than the hollow, aching emptiness that had been his constant companion. A microscope. Not money, not fame, not power. Just a tool to understand the invisible, the unseen intricacies of the universe. It made perfect sense. That's all she had ever truly wanted to understand, just like him in his deepest, most authentic self. And in that profound shared moment, Elias knew with an unshakable certainty that he would not allow her to get lost, to be chewed up by the same relentless machinery that had consumed him. She deserved so much better. He had to find a way to give her that. Part 4. The system's unyielding walls. The change in Elias was subtle, at first barely perceptible unless you were consciously looking for it. He had begun to discern intricate patterns in Iris's behavior that transcended the usual quirks of a quiet, intelligent child. There was an almost ethereal quality to the way she navigated the world, the way her gaze meticulously observed every minute detail, absorbing it all. One crisp morning, as they waited patiently for a food truck to open, Elias idly mentioned that he would need to figure out the sprawling city's complex bus routes to reach a public library across town, hoping to access some resources. Iris stared off into the middle distance for a moment, her mind apparently processing vast amounts of data. Then, without a moment's hesitation, she rattled off the exact routes, the precise stops, and the necessary transfers he would need, even including the expected delays due to ongoing construction on 3rd Avenue. Elias blinked stunned into momentary silence. "How did you know all that?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "I watched them," she said simply, as if the answer were so blindingly obvious it barely warranted a response. He began to test her gently at first, almost imperceptibly. He would casually drop random obscure facts into their conversations, ask seemingly strange, disconnected questions, and then wait, observing her reaction. One afternoon, while they shared a stale sandwich, he asked her if she knew what Fibonacci meant. She didn't answer right away, just frowned slightly, her brow furrowing in concentration. Then, with an almost dismissive air, she said, "It's the ratio of recursive patterns in nature and math, the golden sequence." And then, just as casually, she went back to peeling the label off a soda bottle. She didn't say it as if she were showing off or trying to impress him. She stated it as if she were simply reciting the mundane ingredients on a cereal box. Matter of fact, automatic. That's when Elias's simmering curiosity solidified into an unshakable certainty. Something extraordinary was happening inside her brain, something that utterly defied ordinary categories and conventional understanding. She wasn't just smart. She was profoundly, uniquely different. He began carrying around an old, battered Westerly math textbook, a relic from his own past, hoping to trigger something more, a deeper glimpse into her extraordinary mind. One day, as they huddled together in an abandoned bus shelter seeking refuge from the biting wind, he opened a page at random and pointed to a complex problem involving number theory. He wasn't expecting much, perhaps a puzzled glance or another cryptic silence. But Iris leaned in her green eyes, scanning the problem with an astonishing intensity for a mere 20 seconds. Then, without hesitation, she said, "You copied that wrong." Elias looked again, his heart giving a small lurch. She was right. A minor sign, a crucial negative, was indeed missing. Then, without being asked, she began solving it verbally, walking him through the intricate logic, each step clean, crisp, and flawlessly articulated. Elias didn't speak. He just listened, mesmerized as the complex problem unraveled with an effortless grace. By the time she finished, he was staring at her as if he had seen a ghost, a living, breathing paradox. Iris looked up, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Was it wrong? She asked, her voice tinged with a rare uncertainty. He shook his head slowly, deliberately. "No," he whispered. "It was perfect." The moment didn't feel triumphant, not in the way he was accustomed to. It felt eerie, almost unsettling, like opening a door and discovering an entire vast, unimaginable world hidden behind it. Elias felt a profound chill crawl up his spine, not born of fear, but of a deep, almost spiritual awe. How had no one seen this? How had the world, in its hurried indifference, walked past her day after day, never stopping, never truly looking, never discerning the profound brilliance hidden in plain sight? But then a familiar, bitter understanding washed over him. He remembered how the world had looked past him too, how they had only seen what they wanted to see before the headlines in the fall. People, he realized, only see what they want to see, what fits neatly into their preconceived notions. Iris didn't fit in any of their tidy boxes. She was too quiet to be a stereotypical prodigy, too strange to be easily lovable, too dirty, too invisible to be someone worth truly noticing. But he had noticed. Finally, he had noticed. That night back at the Haven, the weight of his realization settled heavily upon him. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He recalled something one of his old Westerly professors had once told him, a seemingly simple truism that now resonated with profound meaning. True genius doesn't shout, it whispers. Iris whispered. Her brilliance was not a performative spectacle. It was woven into every quiet step, every silent observation, every chalk-drawn equation. He watched her from across the communal table as she meticulously ate a peanut butter sandwich, her eyes seemingly counting crumbs as if they were complex variables in an unseen equation. Elias had known plenty of smart people in his life, brilliant coders, gifted mathematicians, visionary thinkers who reshaped industries. But none of them, he realized, had eyes like Iris's. Eyes that weren't merely seeing the world, they were actively continuously decoding it, stripping it down to its fundamental mathematical truths. Over the next few days, Elias began keeping detailed notes, not on her behavior, but on the workings of her mind. He observed the uncanny way she memorized license plates of passing cars, storing them in some vast internal database. The intuitive way she reorganized soup cans in grocery stores by expiration dates without ever being asked, a silent act of imposed order. The astonishing instance when she meticulously rewrote parts of a logic puzzle book he'd given her, claiming with a quiet conviction that the original had structural flaws. He didn't understand everything she said, not all the complex equations or theoretical musings, but he didn't need to. He was learning her language, the subtle nuances of her silent expressions, the half-sentences pregnant with unspoken meaning, the little shrugs that conveyed more profound understanding than 1,000 words. Iris wasn't hiding her brilliance, not deliberately. She simply didn't see the point in attempting to explain herself to people who she instinctively knew never truly listened. One quiet evening, he brought her to a small tech meetup downtown, a casual gathering of local programmers and innovators. He told her it was just to get out of the cold, maybe to grab some free pizza. The room buzzed with activity, filled with enthusiastic programmers pitching fledgling ideas, trading obscure code jokes, and showcasing half-baked AI demos. Elias kept his distance, a ghost among the living. But Iris, drawn by an invisible current, gravitated toward a whiteboard where a group of graduate students were engaged in a heated technical argument over a machine learning optimization model. After 10 minutes of silent observation, Iris, without a word, simply picked up a stray marker and with a few precise strokes wrote a concise correction directly onto the board. The students, initially amused by her audacity, laughed a dismissive, patronizing sound. But then, as they stared at her elegant, perfectly accurate correction, they realized with a collective gasp she was right. Their laughter died, replaced by a stunned silence. Then a flurry of questions. "Who is she?" they asked, their voices suddenly urgent. Elias stepped in a protective barrier. "She's my niece," he said, a simple lie that to his relief shut them up. That night, she didn't talk about what she had done. Her only question, whispered in the quiet, was a poignant one. "Can I go back next week?" But not everything was so simple, so easily contained. The more Elias learned about Iris, the more profoundly protective he became. He started seeing threats everywhere, in every curious stranger, every official clipboard, every glint of a camera lens. Iris remarkably didn't seem to care. She moved through the world as if no one could truly touch her, an innocent, unaware of the dangers. But Elias knew better. He knew with a chilling certainty that the world didn't protect girls like her. It used them, exploited them, or if they proved inconvenient, ignored them until they irrevocably broke. That night, as he watched her sleep in a cramped corner of the Haven's hallway, curled up like a small, vulnerable animal in an old coat he'd scavenged, he made himself a solemn promise. He would not under any circumstances let the world chew her up, consume her like it had him. Not if he could help it, not if he could stop it. Then came the moment that changed everything again, irrevocably. Iris was idly doodling on a napkin during breakfast, lost in her own thoughts. Elias, out of casual curiosity, leaned over to look. It wasn't a doodle. It was a full schematic, an intricate architectural design using spatial folding algorithms concepts he had only ever encountered in the most rarefied theoretical physics journals. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, a sudden tremor in his hands. She merely shrugged. "Just something I see in my head," sometimes she replied, as if describing a simple daydream. Elias felt like the floor beneath him had utterly shifted, the very ground of his reality dissolving. "Do you know what it does?" He pressed his voice urgent now. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze far away internal. "It makes things fit where they shouldn't," she said. Elias carefully folded the napkin, placed it in his pocket like a sacred relic, and didn't sleep that night. Something had begun, something monumental, something irreversible, and he knew then with an absolute certainty that this wasn't just about adopting a lost child or saving a discarded soul. Iris wasn't merely a bright girl, she was her. The kind of mind he realized that came along once in a generation. The kind of mind that possessed the innate capacity to fundamentally change the way people lived, thought, created forever. But the world he knew didn't want people like that unless they arrived in polished packages, neatly labeled, easily controlled. Elias was broke. He had no power, no influence, no social standing, but he had one overwhelming advantage that no one else did. Iris trusted him implicitly, unconditionally, and he vowed in that moment to earn that trust every single damn day, to fight relentlessly until someone somewhere finally gave her the chance she so profoundly deserved. Elias walked into the downtown school district office with his shoulders squared, his chin held high, wearing the cleanest, most carefully pressed shirt he owned, its collar feeling strangely stiff under the immense weight of hope he carried. Iris sat silently beside him, a small, still presence in her familiar hoodie and jeans. Her arms crossed her luminous green eyes, wandering over the brightly colored posters adorning the walls. "Every child has potential," one of them proclaimed in cheerful, optimistic lettering. He almost laughed out loud, a bitter, hollow sound. The irony was sharp enough to cut through bone. He had called in every conceivable favor, begged an old college contact, a man who now worked as an assistant principal, just to secure them this appointment. The man hadn't promised much, merely a slot on the impossibly tight schedule and a name: Dr. Lena Price, head of the district's renowned gifted assessment program. Elias didn't know what to expect. All he knew, with a desperate certainty that gripped his very soul, was that it simply had to work. Dr. Price was at first impeccably polite, a middle-aged woman with elegant tortoise-shell glasses perched on her nose and a soft modulated voice that seemed to wrap around her sentences, protecting them from any hint of offense. She greeted Iris with a gentle, practiced smile, a professional warmth that seemed utterly disarming. She offered Elias a firm, practiced handshake, her grip confident and unyielding. The initial few minutes were standard routine questions about Iris's background, her elusive family history, any existing educational records. This, Elias knew, was where things would inevitably begin to crack. He explained, his voice measured and calm, that Iris didn't possess formal documents, that she had been living outside the conventional system for years, that she had, in essence, been on her own. Dr. Price's pen, poised to meticulously record every detail, slowed. Her tone shifted subtly, imperceptibly at first, still polite but now infused with a detached clinical professionalism. "We can't assess a student without guardianship verification," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Nor can we make exceptions for minors without proper academic records." Elias tried to push back, his voice rising in urgency. "She's not just gifted, doctor. She's exceptional, truly exceptional. She solves incredibly complex problems, theoretical mathematics, spatial folding algorithms that most PhDs wouldn't grasp. She needs to be evaluated. She deserves this." He carefully placed one of Iris's worn notebooks on the desk between them, opening it to reveal the meticulously annotated pages, dense with layered equations and intricate handwritten graphs. Dr. Price glanced through it, her expression utterly unreadable, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "I've seen fabricated material before, Mr. Thorne," she said calmly, her gaze unwavering. "Even AI-generated scripts. It's remarkably easy to replicate complexity if you know how to make it look impressive." Elias felt a hot flush creep up his neck, his face burning with indignation. "This isn't a trick," he insisted, his voice tight with frustration. "She does this on her own. You can test her right now. Ask her anything." Iris, a small, silent sentinel beside him, looked away. Elias knew she hated this part. Being the subject, the object of scrutiny, the experiment, the one who had to constantly prove she deserved to be noticed, to be acknowledged. Dr. Price closed the notebook, her gesture final, dismissive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. Without proper credentials or established custody, we simply can't proceed. Our resources are limited, and the system is already overloaded with students who've gone through the proper channels." Elias leaned forward, his voice low, intense, charged with desperate disbelief. She could be a prodigy doctor, a once-in-a-lifetime mind, and you're telling me that bureaucracy, the mere adherence to outdated procedures, is more important than discovering that, more important than nurturing such a rare gift. Dr. Price didn't flinch. Her composure remained absolute. I'm telling you, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice a calm, unwavering wall, that we don't bend procedures based on stories. We adhere to protocol. With that, she stood her posture, conveying the unmistakable message that the meeting was definitively over. Elias opened his mouth to protest, to argue, but Iris was already on her feet, a small, defeated figure walking quietly out of the office. He followed helpless, a searing fury boiling in his chest. His fists clenched so tightly, his knuckles whitened. Outside, they walked 5 silent blocks, the rain now a soft drizzle before Iris finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. She thought I was lying. She said her words a quiet accusation. Elias shook his head, desperate to correct her. No, he said, his voice raw. No, Iris. She thought I was lying. You didn't exist to her. Not in a way she could understand or acknowledge. Iris nodded slowly, as if she understood far more than she should, far more than any child her age ought to comprehend. They never believe people like us, she said, her voice imbued with a world-weary resignation. That phrase, people like us, hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. He wanted to argue, to fiercely tell her she wasn't like him, not truly, that she still had a chance, a future untainted by his past. But he didn't, because deep down in the bruised, aching core of his being, he wasn't sure anymore. He remembered with a vivid, painful clarity how it felt when the board of Omnicorp, the very people he had trusted, turned on him, when the media, with their insatiable hunger for scandal, ruthlessly smeared his name, when his former allies, once so quick to laud him, simply erased his contact from their phones, as if he had never existed. He and Iris, he realized, were both ghosts, spectral figures in systems that only saw what they wanted to see and summarily dismissed anything that challenged their rigid perceptions. That night, consumed by a new, desperate resolve, Elias decided to try a completely different approach. He scanned pages of Iris's notebook, meticulously capturing every intricate equation, every complex diagram. He then uploaded these scanned images to a small niche Reddit community, a clandestine gathering of amateur mathematicians and cryptographers far removed from the mainstream academic or media scrutiny. He deliberately didn't use her name. He provided no context, no explanation, no hint of her age or circumstance. He simply posted the images with a terse, challenging question: can anyone solve this? Within hours, the post unexpectedly blew up, shattering the quiet anonymity of the forum. Dozens of comments flooded in. Most admitted with a mixture of awe and frustration that they didn't understand it. A few inevitably accused it of being a sophisticated hoax, a cleverly designed puzzle meant to waste their time. But buried deep within the surging, swirling thread, a user identified only by a prestigious Grandview Institute domain replied their words, cutting through the noise with an almost surgical precision. This isn't undergrad material. Whoever wrote this sees the world in 4D. Please DM me. Elias did, his fingers trembling as he typed the reply. But the act to step into uncharted territory also made him intensely nervous. He was stepping into a new arena, exposing Iris to people he couldn't possibly control, to forces he couldn't predict. The next morning, he sat across from her, his battered laptop open between them, displaying the buzzing Reddit thread. "They don't think you're fake," he said, his voice tinged with cautious hope. She didn't look excited, however. Her small face was simply etched with profound weariness, the weight of her unique burden. So now, what she asked, her voice flat, resigned. Elias hesitated, the vastness of the challenge suddenly daunting. Now, he said, gathering his resolve, we try another way, outside the system, completely outside. Iris shrugged, a small, fatalistic gesture. They'll find a way to shut that down, too. She whispered, her words chilling in their quiet certainty. He looked at her, a pang of frustration mingled with concern. Why do you always expect the worst, Iris? He asked. She didn't answer him directly. Instead, her voice dropped to an almost inaudible whisper filled with the bitter wisdom of countless disappointments. Because it happens, she said, and Elias in that moment had no reply. Not a good one, at least. In desperation, Elias reached out to a trusted friend from his Omnicorp days, Cassandra, a former brilliant data analyst she had, by a stroke of uncanny luck or foresight, left the company just before the devastating implosion. She agreed to meet him in a quiet, unassuming coffee shop far from the prying eyes of the city. Weary but consumed by a burning curiosity, he laid out everything before her. Iris's worn notebooks, filled with impossible equations, her astonishing problem-solving patterns, the soul-crushing failure of the school meeting the Reddit thread. Cassandra listened in silence for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "Elias," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Do you know what you have here?" Elias shook his head, the admission painful. "No," he confessed. "That's precisely the problem. I don't know." Cassandra leaned in closer, her voice conspiratorial. "You have something that institutions aren't built to handle," she explained. "They don't know what to do with a mind like hers, especially when it comes in the wrong package. Unseen, unaccounted for, uncontrollable." Cassandra, ever resourceful, offered to make some calls to leverage her contacts with researchers, professors, and the fringe networks that quietly studied cognitive anomalies. But she issued a stark, chilling warning. "The more attention you draw, Elias," she cautioned, her voice grim, "the more danger you invite. People want to own brilliance, Elias. They don't nurture it. They buy it, or they bury it." That night, Cassandra's chilling words echoed relentlessly in Elias's head, a persistent, unwelcome refrain as he watched Iris finally fall asleep. She lay curled on her cot, a battered math puzzle book balanced precariously on her small chest, her quiet presence filling the desolate shelter hallway. He realized with a sudden agonizing clarity what truly scared him most. It wasn't that no one believed her anymore. It was the terrifying certainty that someone would believe her and then inevitably try to take her away, to possess her, to control her. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Elias found it tucked behind an old dusty radiator in a secluded corner of the Haven's hallway, barely visible beneath a folded hoodie Iris had long outgrown. A weathered spiral notebook, its cover frayed at the edges, soft and pliable from being handled countless times, a silent testament to its constant companionship. He knew immediately with an instinctive certainty that this wasn't just another casual sketchbook, another scribble pad. Iris guarded her mind, her internal world, like it was her only possession, because in truth it was. So for her to leave this behind, even by accidental oversight, meant something profound had shifted. Something in her guarded world had momentarily opened. He turned it over carefully, his hands trembling slightly, almost afraid it might disintegrate under his touch, so fragile did it seem. The first page wasn't filled with words or simple drawings. It was a pattern, a perfect, intricate mathematical fractal drawn in ink with a breathtaking precision that simply did not match her young age, her crude tools, or her grim reality. As he slowly, meticulously flipped through the pages, his breath caught in his throat, a sharp gasp escaping his lips. Page after page revealed a staggering collection of theories, complex equations, and profound thought experiments that looked as though they belonged not in the humble notebook of a homeless girl who had never stepped foot in a proper school, but in a doctoral thesis penned by a seasoned genius. It wasn't just advanced mathematics. There were intricate sketches of revolutionary mechanical designs, mind-bending spatial folding structures, complex energy flow diagrams, and dense notes written in at least 3 different languages, including archaic German and classical Latin. Some parts Elias, with his Stanford-trained mind, recognized from his own rigorous university years. Others utterly alien to him he couldn't place at all. But it was the organization, the sheer meticulous structure of the content that truly stunned him. Everything in the notebook had a purpose, a place in a grand, interconnected schema. Concepts were logically grouped, intricate themes threaded seamlessly through the pages, like carefully constructed chapters in a profoundly complex book. This wasn't random inspiration, not the fleeting musings of a gifted child. This was the disciplined, systematic mind of someone attempting, with an almost divine intensity, to explain the very universe to herself, to decode its hidden language. He didn't touch anything else that day. He simply sat in the shelter's dimly lit back stairwell, the only place he felt he could find a moment of undisturbed privacy, slowly and methodically photographing each and every page with his phone. He then immediately backed up the precious files to every cloud service he could, access a digital fortress to protect this invaluable discovery. A single notebook, he realized with a surging sense of awe, like this could change everything. Not just for Iris, but for him too. He wasn't thinking about money, about reclaiming his lost fortune. He was thinking about legitimacy, about undeniable concrete proof. Finally, tangible, irrefutable evidence that simply could not be ignored, mocked, or dismissed as a mere coincidence or an elaborate stunt. It was there in ink and paper. Undeniable. His hands, which had trembled with despair for months, now trembled with a rekindled purpose, a raw, powerful energy that used to fuel his entire career, his entire existence. He sent a carefully selected handful of images, deliberately devoid of context, to Cassandra. Her reply came a mere 20 minutes later, a rapid succession of urgent messages. "Where did you get this?" The first one read a raw exclamation of disbelief. Then, this is not normal," followed by another even more insistent message. "This should be under review by a university. No joke." And then the final, most pressing demand, "We need to talk ASAP." Elias agreed to meet her that evening, the urgency in her voice palpable. He didn't tell Iris, not yet. She was already beginning to retreat again, a familiar defensive mechanism kicking in. She was shutting down in quiet moments, drawing back into herself like a snail under immense stress. The brutal rejection from the school office had taken more out of her than she had let on. He could see it in the way she had stopped finishing her intricate puzzles, in the way she no longer asked her probing, insightful questions. At the bustling cafe, Cassandra met him, 2 steaming cups of coffee already on the table, her face etched with a multitude of questions, her eyes sharp with intellectual curiosity. "She wrote this," she stated, her voice a low, disbelieving murmur as she carefully turned the pages of the scanned notebook. Elias nodded. "I watched her do some of it," he confirmed. "The rest I found hidden away." Cassandra slowly flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the intricate equations. "You realize what this is, right?" she asked, her voice hushed with awe. "Some of these pages, they're theoretical models that haven't even been published yet. This is the kind of thing postdoctoral researchers spend years, decades, failing to articulate, to even conceive." Elias just nodded again, a silent acknowledgement of the incomprehensible reality before them. "I know," he whispered. Cassandra leaned forward, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and caution. This notebook alone could get her into the Grandview Institute, she asserted, naming the renowned research university. If they believed she actually wrote it, she paused, her expression turning grim. "But that's the thing, isn't it? No one will believe it." Cassandra, however, refused to be deterred. She took copies of the notebook to a professor she trusted implicitly, Dr. Eleanor Vance, a brilliant physicist known for her groundbreaking work in chaos theory. Within a single day, Carlson's email arrived, a beacon of hope in the mounting darkness. "If this is real," she wrote, her words precise and urgent, "I want to meet her immediately." Elias read that line over and over, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a breakthrough, perhaps even the answer he had been so desperately searching for. But as he stared at the email, a triumphant flicker of hope ignited within him. Another message arrived, shattering the fragile peace. This one was from a journalist. Somehow, Elias didn't know how a reporter had gotten wind of the anonymous Reddit thread, and with unnerving speed had traced the images back to an IP address, linked directly to Elias's device. The email's subject line screamed at him, "Child prodigy living on streets seeking comment." His stomach plummeted, a cold, sickening lurch. He rushed back to the haven, panic setting in like a tidal wave of icy water. Iris was gone. He checked the stairwell, the usual alleyway, the bus stop, all their secret spots. Nothing. The shelter staff, bewildered, hadn't seen her since that morning. Elias sprinted through the labyrinthine streets of Port City, calling her name, a desperate raw cry lost in the urban din. He replayed every moment, every word, wondering if he'd pushed too hard, gone too far, exposed her to a world too cruel for her fragile brilliance. Then, almost by a miracle, he found her. Curled up tightly behind a dumpster near the used bookstore they used to visit, clutching her oversized hoodie around her, her small shoulders shaking. Her eyes were red but remarkably, utterly dry. "They're going to take me," she said quietly, her voice a desolate whisper imbued with a terrible prescient knowledge. "I know how this goes. They always find a way." Elias dropped beside her, breathless, his heart hammering against his ribs. "No one's taking you," he swore, his voice hoarse with desperation and a renewed vow. "I promise." She didn't respond, her small body still trembling. He gently brought her back to the haven, even though it wasn't technically allowed, bending the rules for the sake of her fragile peace. That night, she slept beside his cot, silent, unmoving, a small, vulnerable bundle of humanity. He watched her breathe, his heart pounding with an almost unbearable protectiveness. He knew with a chilling certainty that the game had fundamentally changed. He wasn't just a mere bystander anymore. People were watching. Authorities, academics, the relentless media. Iris wasn't invisible anymore, and that tragically made her a target. Elias had witnessed it before, the brutal fate of brilliant minds exposed too soon. They were either ruthlessly exploited, heartlessly discarded, or coldly institutionalized. And Iris, with her unique sensitivities, her quiet nature, she wouldn't survive that. She needed protection, real protection, not just empty words or broken promises. The next morning, Elias made a solemn, unshakable decision. He wouldn't wait for a complacent bureaucratic system to finally recognize her. He would meticulously build a case, so strong, so undeniable, that no one, absolutely no one, could touch her without first going through him. The notebook was step one, irrefutable proof. But there had to be more. Concrete evidence, proof on video, meticulous documentation, independent witnesses. He needed people who could vouch for her truth, not self-serving bureaucrats, but genuine experts, people of integrity. He had been in this game before in his OmniCorp days. Public relations, narrative control. He would tell Iris's story, her truth. But this time, it would be on his terms. And if the world wanted to laugh, to dismiss him, to scoff, then he would let them. Because when they finally realized who she truly was, when the raw, undeniable truth finally unveiled itself, there wouldn't be anyone left laughing. The article, the culmination of the journalist's intrusive inquiries, dropped on a Tuesday morning. It began with a stark, grainy photograph of Iris, a small, poignant figure crouched over the damp sidewalk, intensely scribbling her incomprehensible equations in chalk. Elias sat nearby, his head tilted, his expression a mixture of profound curiosity and desperate hope. The headline, designed to ignite a wildfire of sensationalism, screamed, "The homeless genius, a bankrupt tech founder, and the mystery girl who might change everything." Within hours, it was everywhere. Reddit threads exploded with debate. Twitter ran wild with speculation. The story was simply too strange, too compelling to ignore. A disgraced Silicon Valley CEO now living in a homeless shelter, claiming to have discovered a child prodigy living on the unforgiving streets of Port City. People debated its authenticity with feverish intensity. Was it a hoax, a cynical publicity stunt? Some speculated Elias was desperately angling for a comeback, a redemption narrative. Others, more malicious, openly accused him of shamelessly exploiting a vulnerable child for attention, for personal gain. Iris's face was blurred, ostensibly for protection, but the notebook, its staggering contents, were not. At first, Elias had clung to the naive hope that the relentless media attention would somehow help, that the exposure might finally push the right people, the truly influential ones, to act, to intervene. But the internet, he soon discovered, does not deal in nuance. It thrives on extremes, on black and white, on sensationalism. By the end of that day, his inbox was overflowing with over 200 new messages. Some were from complete strangers brazenly claiming to be long-lost relatives of Iris, sensing an opportunity for profit. Some offered vague placement opportunities that, upon closer inspection, sounded suspiciously like thinly veiled ownership contracts. A chilling few were outright threatening, demanding that he immediately release her for evaluation by unnamed shadowy parties. Even worse were the private messages, the direct messages calling her a fraud, accusing Elias of using sophisticated AI to generate the intricate contents of the notebook, or even more maliciously of mentally manipulating a vulnerable child into performing like a trained animal. Elias, with a weary hand, deleted most of them, but some, particularly the overtly threatening ones, he saved for potential legal reasons if it ever came to that desperate pass. Iris's reaction was far quieter, far more devastating than any public outcry. She simply stopped drawing, her chalk abandoned. She stopped talking, her silence deepening into an impenetrable wall. The very moment the article went live, something behind her luminous green eyes dimmed, a spark of life receding. When Elias, still clinging to a desperate hope that she might be proud, showed her the sensational story, she merely looked at the screen, then at him, her gaze unreadable, and said nothing. She simply walked away, a small, defeated figure. For 2 agonizing days, she barely spoke more than 5 words at a time. She refused to go to the park, refused the comforting familiarity of the used bookstore. One night, Elias, lying awake, heard her whisper a desolate sound, lost in the dark emptiness of the shelter. "They see me now." She breathed, her voice filled with profound sorrow, but not the way I wanted. He didn't know what to say, because she was devastatingly right. Then came the email that shifted everything yet again, plunging them deeper into a terrifying game of high stakes. This one was from a distinguished professor at a renowned private institute in Massachusetts, Dr. Julian Sterling, from the Sterling Institute. He claimed to have seen the scanned notebook images, meticulously reviewed the complex math, and expressed a keen desire to invite Iris for an exploratory weekend evaluation. He offered to cover all travel accommodations and expenses. The tone was formal, impeccably respectful, layered with an almost seductive academic charm. On paper, it appeared to be the dream opportunity, the answer to all their prayers. Elias showed the email to Iris, his own heart, a turbulent mix of cautious optimism and nagging apprehension, unsure what her reaction would be. She read it twice, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then quietly, she asked, "What does evaluation mean?" Elias hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It just means they want to meet you," he explained, trying to inject enthusiasm into his voice, "to see how your mind works, perhaps to open some doors to new possibilities." Iris nodded slowly, her small, thoughtful nod, but her face, transparent in its emotional landscape, conveyed something else entirely. Dread. A quiet, profound dread. Elias decided to do some immediate, intensive research before replying. He called Cassandra, forwarded the email explaining the offer. She made a few discreet calls, tapping into her vast network of contacts. The Sterling Institute, she confirmed, was very real, undeniably prestigious, and renowned for cultivating gifted youth. But it was also known for one crucial thing that was conspicuously absent from their glossy brochures: its deeply entrenched partnerships with powerful private tech firms, shadowy defense contractors, and influential corporate think tanks. Cassandra's warning was sharp, unvarnished. "If she goes there, Elias," she said, her voice grim, "they'll never let her leave without strings attached. That place isn't a school, it's a lab, and she's not ready for it." Elias had already suspected as much, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach, but he had needed to be sure. He dug deeper, devouring every article, every leaked document, every cautionary tale he could find. He unearthed chilling stories of brilliant children pushed too hard too fast, burned out, and discarded before they even reached 16, their potential ruthlessly consumed. He printed the email, stared at it for an hour, the elegant font mocking his desperate hopes. Then, with a decisive hand, he shredded it, tearing it into tiny, defiant pieces. But by then, it was already too late. Someone else had already irrevocably said yes on Iris's behalf. 3 men in impeccably tailored suits showed up at the Haven's doors, their presence an ominous disruption to the shelter's usual quiet order. They carried a crisp printed contract backed by an emergency legal motion. The document claimed temporary educational guardianship, citing the immediate intellectual welfare of the minor as justification. Elias was out when it happened, ironically buying food for Iris, a simple act of care. When he returned, one of the shelter workers, clearly confused and intimidated, handed him the official-looking document. They came with government seals and a lot of legal jargon, the staffer explained, her voice trembling slightly. They said Iris needed to come with them. They said they were from the Department of Advanced Learning, whatever that means. Elias's blood ran cold, a glacial wave of terror washing over him. He knew exactly what it meant. Someone armed with power and influence had ruthlessly exploited the media attention, Iris's public exposure, to claim legal custody over her. He ran, literally sprinting through the dense city, his feet pounding the pavement, frantically calling every number he had saved, every tenuous contact. Cassandra answered, her voice tight with concern, promising to track them, to use her digital skills to pinpoint their location. Iris didn't have a phone. No GPS, no way to signal for help, no way to let him know where they were taking her. Elias, his mind racing, desperately guessed their most likely route back toward the Sterling Institute's West Coast liaison office. It was housed in a nondescript gray corporate building downtown, designed to blend seamlessly into the urban landscape, its true purpose hidden behind a facade of bland anonymity. He reached the lobby just as a sleek black SUV, tinted windows obscuring its contents, pulled into the underground garage. Through the polished glass, he caught a fleeting, agonizing glimpse of her. Iris, a small, still figure in the back seat, looking straight ahead. No discernible expression on her face, no fear, just a quiet, profound resignation, a chilling acceptance of her fate. Elias pounded on the thick glass, screaming her name, his voice raw, desperate but unheard. The SUV, a black Predator, disappeared into the depths of the garage. Inside, a burly security guard, his face impassive, immediately blocked Elias's path. "You're not on the list," The man stated, his voice a low, unyielding rumble. Elias shouted back, his voice hoarse with fury. "That girl doesn't belong to you. You can't take her." The guard didn't flinch. "You need to leave, sir," he said, his hand already resting on his sidearm. A second guard stepped in, flanking him. Elias realized then, with a sickening lurch of despair, what kind of machine he was truly up against. Not just a school, not just a research institution. This was a vast, powerful network, funded, protected, connected to the highest echelons of power, and Iris, his brilliant, vulnerable Iris, was now trapped inside it. That night, Elias stood outside that imposing building for hours, the cold rain, a relentless companion, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles screamed. His teeth ground together, a furious, desperate rhythm. He replayed every agonizing moment that had led to this catastrophe. He had promised her no one would take her. And now they had. Not through violence, not through brute force or blatant kidnapping, but through the law. The very system he had once believed in, now bent and twisted by immense power, by limitless money, and by chillingly impersonal signatures on official documents. He had gravely underestimated them. He had naively shown the world her brilliance, believing it would open doors without once truly comprehending what that same world, in its insatiable desire for control, would then do to possess it. He had made her a target, and now, for the first time in weeks, perhaps even months consumed by a crushing helplessness, he had no plan. Elias didn't sleep. How could he? He paced the small, suffocating hallway of the Haven until the first pale light of sunrise stained the sky, a ghostly promise of a new day. His mind was a maelstrom, endlessly rehearsing arguments, frantically building mental blueprints for a legal counterattack he knew with agonizing certainty he could not possibly afford. Every hour that passed without seeing Iris, without hearing her voice, felt like a precious page being ripped irrevocably from a cherished book. When Cassandra called that morning, her voice low and strained, he practically lunged for the phone. "They've put a gag order on her identity," she said, her voice grim. "Officially, she's been placed under academic guardianship. The paperwork's airtight, Elias." Meticulously constructed, Elias cursed under his breath, a raw, guttural sound of impotent rage. "There has to be a way," he insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. Cassandra paused, a heavy silence stretching between them. "There might be," she finally said, her voice filled with a grim reluctance, "but you're not going to like it." He told her, his voice devoid of all nuance, that he didn't care. "Then meet me," she said, "and bring every document you've ever kept about her. Every single one." He arrived at Cassandra's apartment, a sanctuary of ordered chaos, clutching a worn folder filled with scanned pages, old photographs, and most crucially, the last original copy of Iris's precious notebook. She met him at the door, her eyes heavy with worry, reflecting the toll the unfolding crisis was taking on her. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice hushed, guiding him towards her laptop. On the screen, a chilling scene unfolded, a leaked internal presentation from the Sterling Institute. It showed Iris, a tiny figure isolated in a room with towering glass walls, diligently solving complex algorithms on an interactive screen. Her face was blank, devoid of emotion, a carefully constructed mask. Her voice, barely audible, narrated the solution to an intricate quantum theory model. But that wasn't what stopped Elias cold, what made his blood turn to ice in his veins. It was the voice of the man in the background, the one calmly narrating Iris's astonishing progress to the unseen investors, a voice he hadn't heard but would never forget for 2 agonizing years. Victor Sterling. Elias sat back abruptly, as if he'd been physically punched, the air knocked from his lungs. "Victor," he whispered the name, a bitter taste on his tongue. Cassandra nodded grimly. "He's behind the Institute's private funding arm," she confirmed, her voice devoid of surprise. "They bought into the school last year. I didn't connect the dots until now, but it's clear. He's not just funding her evaluation. He's the one who set it up. He orchestrated it all." Elias's hands shook with uncontrolled rage. Victor Sterling, the man who had ruthlessly betrayed him, who had sold out OmniCorp from under him, who had meticulously orchestrated Elias's public downfall and turned him into a pariah, a public enemy. And now he was using Iris, exploiting her. He didn't just want her mind, her brilliance. He wanted to own it, to patent it, to weaponize it for his own dark purposes. Elias, in his desperate attempt to save Iris, had unwittingly brought her into the open, directly into Victor's waiting, predatory grasp. Victor had been waiting in the dark all along, a patient, calculating spider. The betrayal hit Elias harder, more profoundly than anything he had experienced before, even more than the collapse of his empire. This wasn't just about ego or revenge, not anymore. This was about a child, vulnerable and unique. Victor, Cassandra confirmed, had been the one who had clandestinely leaked the Reddit thread to the journalists. He had meticulously orchestrated the perfect storm, cynically exploiting Elias's desperation, Iris's heartbreaking vulnerability, and the media's insatiable hunger for spectacle, all to cunningly pull her into his insidious grip. It was an elegant, cruel, and terrifyingly effective plan. Elias slammed his fist on the table, the raw anger a burning inferno within him. "I won't let him do this to her," he vowed, his voice low and fierce. Cassandra placed a firm, steady hand on his arm, her gaze intense. "You don't have time to be angry, Elias," she said, her voice cutting through his rage. "You need to be smart." Together they meticulously built a plan. A traditional legal challenge, Cassandra explained, would take weeks, perhaps even months, mired in bureaucratic red tape, and Victor, with his limitless resources, would simply bury it in countermotion's endless delays. But Cassandra had another angle: exposure. Not the fleeting, sensational noise of the media, but undeniable, irrefutable evidence. Something so concrete, so damning, that it couldn't be denied, edited, or spun by Victor's well-oiled public relations machine. "If we can get her on camera," Cassandra mused, her eyes alight with strategy, saying she didn't consent to any of this. "If we can capture her true words, it might open a legal path, especially if we can also get solid proof of manipulation of their unethical practices." Elias nodded, his mind racing, understanding the gravity of her words. "But how do we get to her?" he asked, the logistical challenge immense. Cassandra hesitated for a beat. "You'll have to go through someone inside," she said, the words hanging in the air, weighted with risk. And that's when Elias remembered someone. An old engineer who had once worked for Victor at Omnicorp, a quiet, unassuming man who now consulted ironically at the Sterling Institute. Someone who owed Elias a significant favor, a debt quietly accumulated years ago. They met in a dimly lit parking lot near the harbor, the salt-laced air carrying the distant cries of gulls. The man, Gareth, was older now, his once thick hair receding, his face etched with worry lines. He was visibly nervous, his hands fidgeting. Elias didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out the entire harrowing situation, from Iris's brilliance to Victor's chilling exploitation. Gareth listened, his face growing paler with each word. Then he exhaled hard, a long, weary sigh. "You don't know what you're asking, Elias," he said, his voice strained. Elias leaned in, his voice urgent, pleading. "She's a kid, Gareth, a brilliant one, and Victor is going to rip her apart, use her up, and then discard her." Gareth rubbed his eyes, a gesture of deep weariness. "They're all ready," he began, his voice dropping to a low, horrified whisper, testing her for neural augmentation programs. "Unapproved ones, off-book, illicit. You're right. It's bad, very bad. But you didn't hear it from me." Elias pulled out the worn, creased photo of Iris, that first image of her solving equations in chalk on the sidewalk. He held it out, a silent, powerful plea. "You can't just walk away from this, Gareth," he said. Gareth looked at the image, his gaze lingering on the innocent, focused face of the child. Then slowly, with a profound sigh that carried the weight of his own conscience, he nodded. With Gareth's access badge meticulously copied and temporarily borrowed, and a precisely timed security lapse coordinated by Cassandra, Elias slipped into the labyrinthine depths of the Sterling Institute. The Institute's lower labs were a stark, sterile world, humming with an almost silent, disquieting energy. Soundproofed, lit by cold, impersonal LED panels, they felt like a scientific prison. Elias moved fast, his memory honed by years of navigating complex systems, meticulously memorizing the layout from the detailed blueprints Cassandra had managed to pull. He found Iris in room 14A. She was sitting, a small, fragile figure inside a transparent glass chamber hooked to a complex biometric feedback machine, its wires and sensors a cruel mockery of her natural brilliance. She didn't see him. At first, her gaze fixed on the glowing screen before her, her mind lost in the abstract world of numbers. Then, as he approached the glass, her eyes flickered. When she did see him, her mouth dropped open in a silent gasp, a mixture of disbelief and a flicker of desperate hope. He rushed to the console outside her chamber, his fingers flying across the controls, disabling the feed to the machine she was connected to. "We don't have much time, Iris," he said, his voice urgent, breathy. "Can you walk? Can you move?" She stood immediately without a moment's hesitation, her movements quick, precise despite the shock. But then her voice, small, fragile, yet holding an unbearable weight of pain, she said, "They told me you gave me to them." Elias froze. The words hit him like a physical blow, a gunshot to the heart. What he said stunned his mind, reeling, trying to process the enormity of her statement. "What are you talking about?" "They showed me the forms," she continued, her voice devoid of accusation, simply stating a painful fact. "Said you signed something, that you sold my notebook for investment equity, for money." Elias felt the room spin, a dizzying wave of nausea washing over him. "That's not true," he cried, his voice raw with desperate protest. "Iris, I would never, never." She interrupted him, her small voice cutting through his fervent denials. "I didn't believe them," she said. "Not at first. But then you stopped coming. You stopped looking for me." Elias stepped forward, his hand pressing against the cold glass, separating them, desperately trying to convey the truth through the barrier. "I didn't know where they took you, Iris." He pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been trying to find you frantically, desperately since they grabbed you." "They lied. They always lie." Her luminous green eyes welled with tears, the first tears he had seen her shed. "So you didn't sell me?" She whispered the question, hanging precariously in the air, holding the entire fragile weight of her trust. He grabbed her small shoulders through the glass, looked her straight in the eyes, his gaze unwavering, pouring every ounce of his conviction into his voice. "Never, Iris. Never. I swear on everything I have left. I would die before I ever did that." She nodded just once, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. That was all he needed. That was everything. Her trust, shattered for a moment, had been rebuilt. They moved fast. Gareth had warned them they'd have 10 minutes maximum before someone noticed the system anomaly, before an alarm sounded. Iris walked beside Elias, her steps quick, silent, her face pale but etched with fierce determination. No alarms blared. Not yet. They reached the side stairwell, a cold concrete escape route. But as they burst through the door, exiting the quiet hallway, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. Victor Sterling, impeccably dressed, his suit immaculate, his expression chillingly calm, as if this were merely a routine business meeting. "Elias," he said, his voice smooth, unhurried, as if greeting an old friend, a casual acquaintance from a bygone era. "I should have known it would be you." Elias didn't speak, his gaze fixed on Victor, his body tensed, ready for anything. Iris stood silently behind him, a small, resolute presence. Victor's gaze, cold and appraising, shifted to Iris. "You really don't understand what you're giving up, do you, child?" he said, his voice a silky lure, a deceptive promise. "You could change the world." Iris, however, met his gaze head on, her small chin lifted in defiance. Her voice, though quiet, was clear and unwavering. "I never asked to," she said. They didn't wait for a response. Elias grabbed her hand, pulling her down the stairwell, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. They burst into the narrow, rain-slicked alley behind the Institute, the roar of a waiting car engine, a sudden welcome sound. Cassandra was at the wheel, her face tight with worry. "Get in!" she shouted, her voice urgent. As they sped off, tires squealing against the wet asphalt, Elias looked back at the imposing gray building disappearing rapidly behind them. He knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Victor wouldn't let this slide, wouldn't let his prize slip away so easily. But at least for now, Iris was free. And for the first time since they'd met, since she had entered his broken world, Iris rested her small head on his shoulder. And then, so softly he almost imagined it, she whispered one single profound word, "Dad." They didn't go home, not to the Haven, not to any place easily traceable. Cassandra, with her characteristic foresight, didn't even drive in the direction of the shelter. Instead, she headed straight for an old, nondescript storage garage she kept on the desolate edge of the industrial district, a relic from her Omnicorp days. It was one of her meticulously planned fallback locations, a safe haven from the fallout when whistleblowers needed somewhere to sleep without being found. The space was small, cold concrete, barely heated, but it was quiet, and it was safe. Elias helped Iris out of the car, her hands still trembling slightly from the ordeal. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with tender concern. She nodded, her gaze sweeping across the shadows of the garage. "I think so," she whispered, but her eyes still scanned the murky corners as if some unseen threat was still coming for them. And it was. They all knew it. That night, Cassandra, ever vigilant, meticulously secured the perimeter with a series of makeshift measures, strategically placed camera blind spots, crude but effective motion sensors wired through an old tablet, and a burner phone routed through an anonymous VPN. Elias paced relentlessly, unable to sit still since the escape. The adrenaline, a potent cocktail of fear and desperate triumph, hadn't worn off. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victor's face in the stairwell, chillingly calm, as if he were merely playing a protracted game of chess, and Elias had just moved upon, out of place, a minor inconvenience. Iris sat quietly in a corner of the cold garage, holding the shredded remains of one of her notebooks. She had ripped it herself, a defiant act, pages torn, intricate formulas lost. They copied it, she said quietly, her voice devoid of despair. All of it. The room had a scanner. Elias's heart sank, a wave of despair threatening to engulf him. He knelt beside her, reaching out a comforting hand. "We'll start over," he said, his voice gentle. "Together." But Iris wasn't crying. She wasn't even angry. Her small face was locked in something else entirely. Focus. Intense, unwavering focus. "They don't care about me," she whispered, her voice surprisingly strong. "They care about what I can build. But I see something. Something they don't." Elias leaned in, his brow furrowed. "What, Iris? What do you see?" She looked at him, her green eyes piercing the gloom. "I see how to break it," she said. That was the first moment Elias truly profoundly understood what kind of mind he was protecting. Not just a genius, but a strategist. A creator who also possessed an innate understanding of destruction. And if Victor wanted a war, Elias realized with a surge of grim admiration, Iris was already drawing up the battle plan. The next morning, a sleek black SUV, disturbingly familiar, appeared 2 blocks from the garage. Cassandra spotted it on a security feed, a silent alarm screaming in her mind. "We've been found," she swore, her voice tight with urgency. Elias grabbed his coat, his body instantly alert. "How long?" he asked, his voice clipped. Cassandra replied, her eyes glued to the screen. 5 minutes, maybe less." They scrambled, a frantic ballet of desperate action, packing what little they could, erasing digital data, a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. But Iris didn't move. She was meticulously finishing something, her fingers flying across the keys of a salvaged tablet, a USB drive, small and unassuming, hand-labeled, simply encrypted. "This is everything they stole," she said, holding it out to Elias, only reversed. Elias took it, not fully comprehending the implications, but trusting her implicitly, absolutely. The 3 of them made it to the fire exit, just as the first man in a suit, a grim-faced automaton, stepped into the garage through the main door, holding a tablet that would confirm their presence. He looked like he belonged in a corporate office, not orchestrating a raid. They bolted, sprinting down the alley. Another SUV, a black shark, cut them off its tires, squealing. They turned. This time, Iris led. She navigated them with an uncanny intuition, darting through construction scaffolding, scaling over trash bins, ducking under rusty gates, like she'd rehearsed it countless times. "They're tracking heat signatures," Cassandra shouted, her voice strained. "We need crowds. We need to disappear into the noise." Iris, without a word, pointed towards the light rail station, its distant hum a beacon of escape. Elias didn't ask. He simply followed, trusting her unerring instincts. They reached the platform just as a train pulled in, packed to overflowing with oblivious commuters. Elias shoved through the doors, dragging Iris close, shielding her. Cassandra jumped on last, a split second before the doors hissed shut, and the train lurched forward, pulling away from the platform. Elias looked back, his heart hammering. One of Victor's men had made it to the platform. He held up his phone and snapped a photo, a final chilling confirmation of their escape. "We need to disappear," Elias said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." They got off at the next stop and went underground. Literally. Port City's old city beneath the city, a forgotten network of subterranean passages, was mostly tourist junk, now a quaint historical relic. But some of the darker, less-known passages were still navigable. Cassandra, ever prepared, led them through a narrow, damp service tunnel used decades ago by maintenance crews. They walked in near silence, the only sounds their hurried footsteps and the occasional drip from ancient corroding pipes. Iris finally spoke, her voice echoing faintly in the claustrophobic darkness. "I sent something before we left," she said. Elias turned, his heart leaping. "What, Iris? What did you send?" She pulled out a second USB drive identical to the first, to Professor Vance. "The professor from Grandview," she explained. "The real notebook, the original pages. If something happens, he'll publish them. he promised. Elias blinked, stunned by her foresight, her meticulous planning. "You planned for this?" he asked, his voice filled with a profound awe. Iris nodded, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. "Didn't you?" By nightfall, they were in a safe house, a true bunker owned by one of Cassandra's old hacker contacts. It was bare bones. Just mattresses on the floor, bottles of water, instant food, but it felt like an impregnable fortress. The city outside kept moving, oblivious to the high-stakes drama unfolding beneath its surface. Elias sat with Iris, the exhaustion, a heavy blanket upon him, and asked what she meant by breaking it, by breaking Victor's system. She opened her laptop, an old, battered model they'd kept meticulously disconnected from all networks, its screen glowing faintly in the darkness. Their system, she explained, her voice gaining a quiet, formidable power, is built entirely on prediction, on behavior, on data flow, on control. But if we feed it the wrong pattern, just a small fracture, a ripple of chaos, it collapses. Elias leaned in, his gaze fixed on her. "You're going to crash their AI?" he asked, a thrill of forbidden excitement running through him. Iris smiled faintly, a crooked, almost mischievous smile that rarely graced her lips. "Not crash," she corrected him. "Corrupt." That night they stayed up planning, the three of them, a strange, unlikely alliance against a monolithic power. Cassandra, the master strategist of the digital world, handled the intricate digital diversions, decoys, false trails, phantom signals designed to mislead Victor's surveillance. Elias, grounded and practical, managed the physical logistics, securing contacts, arranging food, planning transport options. But Iris, small and quiet, was the undisputed nucleus of their operation. She meticulously designed a sequence of code, a digital virus that would appear as nothing more than innocuous noise to most systems. But to the hyper-predictive AI Victor had so ruthlessly built on her stolen work, it would be a precisely targeted short circuit. "He thinks he understands how I think," she said, her voice filled with a chilling confidence. But he copied the answers, not the questions. Elias stared at her, overwhelmed by the sheer, terrifying brilliance of her mind. "You're terrifying, Iris," he whispered, a profound realization dawning on him. Iris gave him that same crooked smile, a rare glimpse of her hidden personality. "You raised me," she said, her voice dry, a playful jab that softened the intensity of the moment. At 3 a.m, Elias sat alone on the cold fire escape, his eyes fixed on the distant skyline of Port City. His body ached with exhaustion. His mind raced a whirlwind of calculations, risks, and desperate hopes. But somewhere, deep beneath the crushing fatigue, something new stirred within him. Clarity. An absolute, unshakable clarity. He knew now, with an undeniable certainty, what he had to do. Not just protect Iris, not just shield her from the world's ravenous appetite, but to expose Victor, to tear down everything he stood for, every corrupt edifice he had built. Cassandra joined him quietly, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. "She's ready," she said, her voice mirroring the quiet resolve in his own heart. Elias nodded, taking a long, fortifying breath, the cold night air filling his lungs. "So am I," he replied. He looked out at the city, a sprawling beast stirring in its slumber. Tomorrow everything would change. Win or lose, they would not go quietly. The next morning dawned like the calm before a colossal storm. Rain pattered softly against the cracked windows of the safe house, a low, rhythmic background hum beneath the taut tension in the room. Iris stood by the table, her face illuminated by the pale glow of her screen, her small figure radiating an almost palpable intensity. The program she had painstakingly designed, an elegant virus meticulously disguised as a harmless data anomaly, was ready. Its purpose wasn't to destroy, to obliterate. Its purpose was far more insidious, more profound. It would confuse. It would inject chaos. It would sow a fundamental seed of illogic into a system that thrived on absolute control, on predictable order. She had named it simply Disobey. Elias didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He knew. This was Iris's fight now, a silent, profound rebellion against the forces that sought to control and exploit. And he, Elias, had become her shield, her sword, and the living, breathing proof that she didn't have to do it alone. Cassandra stood ready on the other side of the room, her gaze fixed on her monitors, meticulously monitoring the 3 VPN reroutes they had painstakingly set up, critical for the anonymous upload. It was showtime. The first step was infiltration. Gareth, the engineer who had so courageously helped them escape, had provided a crucial access key. Temporary, a one-time only pass linked to a forgotten research terminal buried deep within the Sterling Institute's vast cloud architecture. Cassandra walked Elias through the precise timing, a meticulously choreographed dance against the clock. 60 seconds to enter the system, 30 to route through the various layers of security, 15 to upload the virus, and then vanish. Any longer and they would be traced exposed, but it wasn't enough just to sabotage the system to inject chaos. Iris, with her profound understanding of human nature, had insisted on one more crucial move: transparency. If we vanish, she had stated, her voice quiet but firm, they'll just rewrite the story. They'll paint you as unstable Elias, me as a mere case study, a flawed experiment. We need truth, unvarnished truth. And so, along with the disobey virus, they had scheduled a massive data dump. Every single notebook scan, every incriminating test result, every signed order for unethical procedures, every single false consent form Victor's Institute had ever coerced. All of it, scheduled for a midnight broadcast across public academic servers, and crucially, one very loud, very public Reddit thread where it would spread like wildfire. At precisely 11:58 p.m., Iris, her small finger poised over the keyboard, clicked execute. Nothing exploded. There was no blaring siren, no dramatic system crash, just a profound, unsettling silence. Then the laptop beeped once, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound, and the upload bar, a silent testament to their victory, simply vanished. It was done. Elias sat beside her, staring at the now blank screen, his heart pounding a triumphant rhythm. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice filled with an almost disbelieving awe. Iris didn't answer. She simply unplugged the machine, her face serene, and handed it to Cassandra. "Smash it," she said, her voice calm, utterly devoid of hesitation. And Cassandra did. 5 swift, powerful hits with a hammer, no hesitation. The pieces scattered across the floor like broken chains, shattered symbols of their defiance. Now, Iris said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We disappear for real, but they didn't have to run for long. The world, a relentless, insatiable entity, found them again. This time, however, it was not with chilling contracts or armed escorts. This time it arrived with microphones, with cameras, and with questions, a different kind of pursuit. The data dump unleashed into the digital ether went viral in a matter of hours, an unstoppable wave of truth. Scientists across the globe confirmed the authenticity of Iris's work, their collective voices lending undeniable weight to her genius. Educators, outraged by the ethical violations, demanded immediate, thorough investigations. A former board member of the Sterling Institute, his conscience finally stirred by the avalanche of truth, came forward, publicly admitting Victor's long-standing involvement in the illegal acquisition of intellectual property, confirming the scale of his corruption. Professor Eleanor Vance, the brilliant physicist Iris had trusted, stepped forward, becoming her fierce public advocate, denouncing the Sterling Institute and eloquently proclaiming Iris to be a mind shaped by fire, not formula, a genius forged in adversity. Within 2 dizzying days, the Sterling Institute's stock plummeted, a spectacular financial collapse. Victor Sterling went silent, his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. The machine had cracked. Iris, steadfast in her quiet conviction, refused every single interview, every lucrative offer, every prestigious scholarship that flooded in from universities around the world. She didn't want to be anyone's icon, anyone's symbol. She simply wanted to breathe, to live, to learn on her own terms in peace. Elias, understanding the depth of her desire for normalcy, for freedom from scrutiny, respected that choice implicitly. He didn't push. He didn't try to steer her towards a path she didn't desire. Instead, they moved again, seeking anonymity and quiet solitude, to a small, picturesque coastal town in Oregon, where the rhythmic crash of ocean waves replaced the harsh cacophony of the city. No one there knew their names. No one recognized their faces from the sensational headlines. Elias took a quiet, unassuming job fixing computers at the local school, finding a surprising solace in the tangible, straightforward work. Iris, under a new, carefully chosen name, enrolled quietly in the local school, just another student. No headlines, no invasive tests, no constant pressure. Just books, questions, and the precious, unburdened space to explore her mind. Sometimes she still drew equations on napkins, intricate designs appearing magically on the mundane paper. But now, when she did, a faint, contented smile touched her lips, a rare glimpse of her inner peace. One evening, months later, Elias found her in the kitchen, meticulously dismantling a blender, its components spread across the counter like a complex puzzle. She was intently studying its inner workings, her brow furrowed in concentration, trying to determine if the torque ratio could be improved. He laughed, a soft, warm sound that spoke of contentment. She looked up, her green eyes meeting his. "Do you think I'll ever be normal?" she asked, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her voice. Elias sat down beside her, his gaze filled with profound affection. "Iris," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you're not meant to be normal. You're meant to be free." She nodded, a small knowing gesture, and that he knew was enough. More than enough. Cassandra visited often, a welcome bridge to the outside world, bringing news and updates. She shared how legislation was slowly but surely changing, how oversight committees were being formed directly inspired by Iris's case, how her data had sparked a powerful global movement for the ethical treatment of gifted children, ensuring they would no longer be exploited or ignored. Iris didn't care for the credit, didn't crave the accolades, but she deeply, profoundly cared about one thing: that other kids like her, other unseen, unheard geniuses, might not be hunted, hidden, or broken by the systems that should protect them. That mattered more than anything. She began writing again, not just her complex, beautiful math, but letters. Simple, heartfelt letters to other girls in shelters, to compassionate teachers who might encounter struggling children, to the younger version of herself, who once thought no one would ever truly see her. And Elias, he finally stopped running from his past. He found a deep, abiding peace in the simple, everyday things: the warmth of morning coffee, a quiet walk with Iris along the shore, the gentle sound of chalk scraping against a worn blackboard as she explained something beautiful and complex to him, just for the pure joy of understanding. He no longer cared about legacies, about billion-dollar startups, about fleeting headlines or public adulation. He cared about one singular thing, showing up every single day for the girl no one believed in, until he did. In the end, Iris didn't just change his life. She fundamentally changed his entire definition of purpose. Not with grand speeches, not with world-altering inventions, not with a return to public glory, but with her quiet presence, with her stubborn, undeniable brilliance, with a profound courage wrapped in eloquent silence. And sometimes, when strangers, intrigued by their quiet, unconventional bond, asked about her, Elias would simply say one thing, a truth that encapsulated everything: she wasn't found. She revealed herself. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for staying with us through this long journey. Your time, your attention, and your compassion mean the world. Stories like these remind us of resilience, hope, and the quiet strength that often goes unseen. Wherever you are watching from, know that your presence here makes this shared experience richer and more meaningful. We'd love to hear how this story touched you, what moved you, inspired you, or even challenged you. Your feelings and thoughts are what breathe life into every tale. Please share them with us in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe. Your support empowers us to continue creating and sharing stories that speak to the heart and soul. Together we build a community where kindness, hope, and human connection flourish. Until we meet again in the next story, take care, stay curious, and keep believing in the power of stories to change the world. See you soon.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.